The grand Ravenscroft estate stood in the fading light of evening, its towering silhouette casting long shadows over the grounds. Inside, a secret had been buried for generations, one that, if uncovered, could shatter everything. As a young artist uncovers a family's forgotten legacy, he vanishes without a trace, leaving behind nothing but a cryptic letter and a mystery that demands to be solved. But as the truth begins to surface, one question lingers. Who is the real heir to the Ravenscroft fortune? Will the hidden heir finally emerge to claim what's theirs? Stay tuned to uncover the chilling truth behind Ravenscroft House. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more shocking mysteries that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Chapter 1. The Unlikely Invitation. It was the kind of evening where the air felt just crisp enough to remind one of the changing seasons, with autumn settling its cool fingers over the countryside. The streets of London were already lit by the warm amber glow of gas lamps, casting long shadows on the cobblestone roads. A quiet evening, perfect for staying indoors by a crackling fire. Yet Hercule Poirot had never been one to settle for such simplicity when mysteries called. The detective sat at his desk in his modest office, sifting through a pile of letters and documents, when a small, delicate envelope caught his eye. Its creamy parchment, embossed with a seal of gold, was elegant yet unassuming. It was addressed to Monsieur Hercule Poirot in neat flowing script, the ink shimmering faintly in the dim light. As Poirot turned the envelope over in his hands, he noticed something peculiar. It was not the work of a secretary, nor a bureaucrat. This invitation was carefully crafted. With a knowing smile, he sliced the envelope open with a steady hand, revealing a single card inside. The card itself was embossed with ornate golden lettering, intricate but purposeful in design, and in the center were these words: "You are cordially invited to a dinner at the home of Lord and Lady Ravenscroft on the evening of October 15th at 7 p.m. sharp. Please come prepared to enjoy an evening of fine dining, conversation, and perhaps a puzzle." Poirot read the card twice, his keen eyes scanning the words for meaning. A dinner invitation? From Lord and Lady Ravenscroft, no less. Well-known socialites whose lavish gatherings were the talk of the city. Yet something about the card intrigued Poirot. It was the phrase, "prepared to enjoy a puzzle," that made him pause. Most hosts of such social occasions would never invite someone to partake in a puzzle as though it were a mere game. No, this was not a casual dinner. It was a carefully laid trap, or so Poirot's instincts whispered to him. His gaze lingered on the last line of the card again. Perhaps a puzzle. It was an invitation wrapped in mystery, a challenge to the mind that only a select few could appreciate. Was it a coincidence that Poirot had been invited, or was there something more to it? With the detective's sharp sense of curiosity piqued, the thought of a mystery on the horizon was too enticing to dismiss. After a brief moment of reflection, Poirot stood up and reached for his coat. He was never one to shy away from a challenge, especially one as intriguing as this. The Ravenscrofts were known for their extravagant parties, but he suspected they were hiding something darker beneath the surface, a suspicion further fueled by the cryptic words of the invitation. He had been summoned, and he would not ignore it. As Poirot stepped out of his office into the quiet evening, the streets of London seemed to grow quieter still. A soft wind rustled the falling leaves, and Poirot's mind began to spin with possibilities. Who would be at this dinner? What puzzle lay in store for him? And why was he, of all people, chosen to partake in it? The Ravenscroft estate loomed before him, an imposing structure that seemed more like a fortress than a home. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he gazed upon the tall stone walls and the iron gates that stood open, as if waiting for him. The house, perched on a hill, cast long shadows against the setting sun. It was as grand as any noble residence, yet there was an air of foreboding about it. Something felt wrong. He entered the gates and walked along the winding path to the front door, which was opened almost immediately by a servant who did not speak, but simply gestured for him to come inside. Poirot took in the opulence of the entryway. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the scent of freshly polished wood filled the air. Yet despite the grandeur of the surroundings, there was an underlying tension, an unspoken heaviness that made the hairs on the back of Poirot's neck stand on end. The dining room was a large, tastefully decorated space with a long mahogany table set for a dozen guests. It was elegant, yes, but Poirot noticed the faintest tremor in the air. The laughter of the guests was forced, the clinking of glasses too sharp, too loud. No one spoke with true comfort. Lady Ravenscroft was the first to greet him, her pale face framed by dark curls. She offered a smile that, though polite, didn't quite reach her eyes. Beside her, Lord Ravenscroft appeared in fine evening attire, his face painted with a grin that seemed more practiced than genuine. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot!" Lord Ravenscroft exclaimed, his voice a little too boisterous. "We are so glad you could join us this evening. We have a very special puzzle prepared for you." Poirot nodded graciously, his eyes scanning the room as he made his way to the table. His gaze settled on the other guests, each one peculiar in their own way. There was Dr. Mortimer, a family physician with an aloof air about him, and Mrs. Blanchard, a widow with a soft voice that carried an undertone of sadness. A young artist, Vincent, sat quietly in a corner, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Each of them had their own stories, and Poirot's little gray cells began working immediately, seeking to uncover what had brought them all together. The dinner commenced with the gentle clink of silverware, and Poirot continued his silent observations, all the while aware of the undercurrent of unease that simmered just beneath the surface. The conversations flowed, but Poirot could feel the nervous energy in the room, as though everyone was awaiting something beyond the meal, beyond the polite pleasantries. Suddenly, the sound of something crashing came from the kitchen. The guests looked up in surprise, but Lord Ravenscroft quickly dismissed it. "Nothing to worry about, Monsieur Poirot," he said with forced cheerfulness. "Just a minor accident." But Poirot wasn't convinced. His mind raced with questions. What had caused that crash? Why was the air so thick with discomfort? And what exactly was the puzzle that had been promised? As the evening wore on, Poirot's suspicion deepened. He could sense that this was no ordinary dinner. A mystery was unfolding, one that he had been invited to solve, but he knew deep down that this particular puzzle would not be solved without consequences. The stage was set. Poirot had entered a web of secrets and intrigue, where every word, every glance, and every clink of glass might hold the key to solving the riddle. Little did he know, the true challenge was just beginning, and the dinner that had seemed so benign at first would soon reveal its darker, more sinister side. The detective's keen mind was already working. And though the night was still young, Poirot was certain of one thing. This puzzle would be unlike any he had ever encountered before. Chapter 2. The Gathering Darkness. The night deepened as Poirot sat at the grand dining table, the flickering candlelight casting soft shadows across the polished surface of the mahogany. The grand chandelier above seemed to shimmer, as if the light itself was nervous. The air was thick with tension, and Poirot could sense it in the way the guests glanced at one another, their words strained and uncomfortable. The pleasant hum of conversation felt out of place, like a symphony playing over a rift of dissonance. Lady Ravenscroft, sitting to his left, offered a faint smile, but her eyes were wide with some unsaid worry. Every time Poirot's gaze met hers, she quickly looked away, as if hiding some unspoken fear. Lord Ravenscroft, seated at the head of the table, laughed too loudly, his voice carrying an unnatural cheerfulness that did not match the room's atmosphere. Poirot could almost hear the tremor in it. His keen eyes swept the rest of the table. Dr. Mortimer, the family's trusted physician, sat with his hands folded neatly on the table, his face impassive, but Poirot noticed the slight furrow of his brow. The widow, Mrs. Blanchard, was seated beside him, her hands trembling just slightly as she reached for her glass. Vincent, the young artist, stared into his plate, his expression unreadable, yet there was a certain unease about him. He kept glancing towards the door as though expecting something or someone to arrive. Poirot took his first sip of wine, but he barely tasted it. His mind was busy, his little gray cells already turning over the puzzle laid out before him. What was it about this gathering that set it apart from any other dinner party? What was it that made the air so heavy with hidden truths? The conversation meandered, each guest making their attempts at polite small talk, but it was clear to Poirot that the evening was not one of simple pleasantries. The puzzle, if there was one, was far more elusive than the invitation had suggested. No one dared speak directly of it. There was something unsaid, something too dangerous to acknowledge aloud. Poirot's mind danced with possibilities. A family secret? A hidden agenda? Or perhaps the puzzle was not just an intellectual game, but something far more sinister? The clock on the wall ticked softly, but the sound seemed far louder than it should have. Then abruptly, a loud crash came from the kitchen, followed by a string of hushed voices and hurried footsteps. The room froze. A chill ran through the guests. It was as if the atmosphere itself had taken a sharp intake of breath, waiting for something to happen. Lord Ravenscroft, who had been engaged in a conversation with Dr. Mortimer, immediately stood a touch too quickly, as though startled by the noise. His eyes darted towards the door, then to the staff. His voice, when it came, was overly calm. "Ah, a minor accident. Nothing more," he said, his words too smooth, too practiced. "Please, everyone, continue enjoying your meal." But Poirot's eyes never left him. He saw the brief, almost imperceptible glance that passed between Lord Ravenscroft and the housekeeper, a fleeting exchange laden with something Poirot couldn't place. It was not just concern. It was the kind of look shared between people who had witnessed something they wished to forget. Something had gone wrong. Something they didn't want the guests to know. Poirot's gaze shifted to the other guests, who had all momentarily halted in their movements, their eyes wide with anxiety. Vincent, the young artist, shifted nervously in his chair, his gaze still flicking towards the door as though expecting someone or something to appear. Mrs. Blanchard's lips trembled slightly as she lowered her glass, her eyes fixed on her hands, as if trying to avoid the growing discomfort in the room. The servants were in motion again now, clearing away the broken dishes, but Poirot's mind raced. Why had the crash sounded so sudden, so loud? Why had Lord Ravenscroft seemed so caught off guard? Surely it was a simple mistake in the kitchen, a tray dropped, or a plate broken. But Poirot didn't trust it. Not for a moment. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. The room, though still filled with the soft clatter of silverware and glasses, seemed to close in on Poirot. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension, a quiet fear clinging to the air. It was as though everyone at the table was waiting for something to happen, the kind of event that would change everything. And Poirot's instincts told him that this something was not far off. As he took another sip of wine, Poirot allowed himself a moment to study his surroundings. He was acutely aware of every small detail: the polished surface of the table, the faint scent of roses from the bouquet in the center, the flickering candle flames that danced in nervous rhythm. Everything seemed too perfect, too controlled. Nothing about this evening felt organic. It was as though the entire dinner had been carefully arranged, each guest placed where they should be, each word spoken with purpose. The silence stretched long, broken only by the occasional clink of glass. It felt, to Poirot, like a game, one in which the stakes were far higher than the guests realized. And as much as he wanted to ask questions, to peel back the layers of this mystery, he knew better than to rush into conclusions. In a room where everyone was hiding something, one misstep could change everything. It was then that the conversation began again, though it was clearly not the same. The guests spoke now in a softer tone, their voices lower, as though trying to shield themselves from the ominous feeling that hung in the air. No longer did they speak with enthusiasm or passion. It was all polite, careful words. They danced around the topic of the evening's puzzle, but it was clear that no one dared speak openly about it. Then, just as the tension began to feel unbearable, Lord Ravenscroft stood again, his smile returning, but still strained too tight. He raised his glass and announced, "A toast to our guest of honor, Monsieur Hercule Poirot, the master of puzzles. May your skills be tested this evening and beyond." There was a brief, awkward silence before the guests murmured their agreement, their glasses raised, but Poirot felt the weight of their eyes on him. It wasn't admiration they held for him. It was expectation. The puzzle was no longer a mere curiosity. It was a challenge. And Poirot knew that the real puzzle was not the one they would present to him, but the one they were all desperately trying to keep hidden. As the evening wore on, Poirot's mind churned with thoughts and observations. He had already noted the smallest gestures, the nervous glances, the inconsistencies in the stories people told. His suspicions deepened, but he remained calm, allowing the mystery to unfold at its own pace. For Poirot, this was the beginning of something far more complex than he had first imagined. There was a riddle at the heart of this gathering, yes, but it wasn't the one they had shown him. It was the darkness that lingered in the corners of the room, the one they were all avoiding. And Hercule Poirot, the great detective, would soon find it. And when he did, he knew the answers would be far more dangerous than anyone could have anticipated. As the clock chimed softly in the background, Poirot's eyes narrowed with quiet resolve. The game had begun, and he was ready to solve it. But as always, the key to solving any puzzle was knowing when to wait and when to strike. Chapter 3. The first clue. The evening continued with a peculiar kind of stillness that seemed to settle deeper with every passing minute. Poirot's mind, ever sharp, couldn't help but notice the oddness of it all. A dinner meant for casual conversation and enjoyment had turned into a quiet, unnerving ordeal. The clinking of silverware was now muted, as if the noise was an unwelcome intrusion on the somber mood that hung over the room. Poirot sat back in his chair, his fingers gently tracing the edge of his wine glass. His little gray cells were already working in overdrive, cataloging every minor detail, every whispered phrase. The guests had resumed their attempts at conversation, but they spoke now in a way that felt rehearsed, as though they were playing a role they had not quite perfected. Lady Ravenscroft's polite laughter seemed hollow, and Lord Ravenscroft's jovial nature had taken on a forced quality. Even the servants seemed too quick to bow, too swift in their movements, as if trying to avoid being seen. It was then that Poirot noticed something curious. On the far side of the room, where the shadows were deepest, something had caught his eye. There, near the large portrait of the Ravenscroft ancestors, a small, nearly imperceptible movement. It was fleeting, a flutter of fabric, a soft shift in the air, but it was enough to set Poirot's mind alight. Was it a draft, or was there something or someone hidden in the shadows? His gaze sharpened, but the moment passed. No one else had seemed to notice, and the conversation around the table continued, though in the back of Poirot's mind, he knew something was amiss. His instincts told him there was more to the evening than mere pleasantries. The puzzle promised to him in the invitation seemed to be something much more complex, something darker. The meal progressed, the courses arriving with impeccable timing, but Poirot's focus was no longer on the food. His attention was consumed by the subtle undercurrent that rippled through the room. He could hear the faintest tremors in the voices of the guests, could see the way their hands trembled ever so slightly as they reached for their glasses. There was fear in the air, like a quiet storm just waiting to break. Then, as if the evening had decided to reveal its first clue, it came. Lady Ravenscroft rose from the table, her porcelain face ashen. The conversation immediately halted. Her hands trembled ever so slightly as she placed her napkin on the table, a soft rustling in the otherwise tense silence. I must take a moment, she said, her voice thin and shaky. Poirot's eyes flicked to her in an instant. Her movements were uncharacteristically hurried, but she did not make eye contact with anyone. Instead, she turned and hurried towards the door leading into the corridor, her silhouette barely visible as she passed through the doorway. The other guests exchanged uneasy glances, but none spoke. The atmosphere in the room became palpably heavier, as though something irreversible had just occurred. Poirot waited, watching the door, his mind working at lightning speed. He had seen this behavior before. It was the subtle signs of guilt, of something being concealed. Lord Ravenscroft's voice broke the silence, but it was different this time. His tone, no longer forced, was almost too calm. "A small matter, I assure you," he said, a slight quiver in his voice betraying his attempt at nonchalance. "The lady has been under considerable stress lately, I'm afraid." Poirot's sharp eyes did not miss the way Lord Ravenscroft quickly reached for his glass, his hand shaking ever so slightly as he brought it to his lips. His eyes flickered towards the door where his wife had disappeared, then quickly returned to the group, forcing a smile. "I'm sure it's nothing. Please, let us continue with our dinner," Lord Ravenscroft insisted, but his voice lacked the usual confidence. The crack in his composure was barely perceptible, but Poirot had caught it. Dr. Mortimer, who had been silent for much of the evening, cleared his throat and spoke, his voice cool and professional. "Perhaps we should let Lady Ravenscroft rest, if she's feeling unwell." Poirot allowed himself to linger on the conversation, studying the guests with his usual scrutiny. Vincent, the young artist, appeared uncharacteristically calm. His gaze was steady, but his fingers drummed nervously on the edge of his glass. Mrs. Blanchard, on the other hand, seemed to have withdrawn even further into herself, her eyes darting occasionally to the door where Lady Ravenscroft had exited, but not with concern. No, it was something else, a strange, anxious awareness. The housekeeper entered the room shortly after, her face unusually pale. She whispered something briefly to Lord Ravenscroft before disappearing again. Her sudden presence only added to the mounting sense of unease. Poirot's eyes followed her retreating figure, and he observed her with keen interest. The housekeeper had been moving unusually fast earlier, her steps hurried, almost too quick. He wondered, had she seen something she wasn't supposed to? The dinner continued, but the events of the last few moments lingered in the air, as though the evening had taken a dark turn. Poirot's mind was already running through possible scenarios. What had Lady Ravenscroft been so frightened of? What had she seen? Or perhaps, what was she hiding? And why did it feel as though the dinner was a mere facade, a distraction from something much more dangerous? Poirot's quiet contemplation was interrupted by the sound of a soft thud from the hallway. The guests exchanged confused looks, but no one moved to investigate. The noise seemed too distant to be of concern, yet Poirot's senses were on high alert. His little gray cells were buzzing, weaving threads together. There was something in that hallway, something Lady Ravenscroft had seen, or perhaps something she had uncovered. Poirot's gaze once again fixed on the door. He had learned much from that brief moment of her departure. There was a truth hidden somewhere, and he would find it. It was clear now. The Ravenscroft family had secrets. Their polished veneer hid cracks, and those cracks were beginning to show. He took another sip of wine, though he barely tasted it. As the minutes stretched on, Poirot knew one thing for certain. The first clue had been given to him, not in words, but in actions. The fear in Lady Ravenscroft's hurried exit was the clue, and it was a clue that pointed to a mystery far deeper than anyone had anticipated. There was darkness in Ravenscroft House, and Poirot's every instinct told him that the puzzle was just beginning to unravel. Just as Poirot's mind began to settle into this new line of thought, he heard the faintest whisper from the far side of the room. It was almost imperceptible, a voice too soft to be clearly understood, but Poirot's ears picked it up, and his gaze shifted swiftly towards Vincent. The young artist had his eyes fixed on the door through which Lady Ravenscroft had disappeared, his lips parted as if to speak. Poirot's sharp gaze locked with Vincent's for a fraction of a second, and in that fleeting moment, Poirot saw the unmistakable flicker of fear,
a flash of something unspoken in Vincent's eyes. The artist quickly averted his gaze, but not before Poirot had caught it. A tell. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. Slowly, the web of lies and deceit was starting to weave itself around him, and Poirot, as always, would be the one to untangle it. But for now, he remained calm, his mind sharp, watching, waiting for the next clue to emerge. In this house, surrounded by shadows and whispers, Poirot knew the true puzzle was just beginning. And soon, he would solve it, not just for the sake of the mystery, but for the danger that lay hidden beneath it all. Chapter 4. The puzzle unfolds. The atmosphere in the Ravenscroft dining room had grown thicker, the tension hanging like a fine mist that no one dared disturb. The guests, though still seated around the grand table, no longer spoke with the ease they once had. The conversation that had flowed so freely earlier was now sparse, punctuated only by the clinking of utensils, the occasional cough, and the sound of chairs shifting as the guests fidgeted nervously in their seats. Poirot, ever observant, remained calm and composed, his sharp eyes scanning every movement in the room. His little gray cells were whirring quietly, piecing together
the puzzle. There was more to this evening than anyone had anticipated, more than even Lord Ravenscroft had let on. But Poirot had learned long ago that the answers to such mysteries rarely come easily, and often they appear only when least expected. It was then, in the midst of this uneasy silence, that Lord Ravenscroft rose from the table once again, a glass of wine in hand. His movements were a bit too slow, his posture just a little too stiff, and his smile too wide, too practiced. The guests watched him, their eyes full of a mix of anticipation and fear. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lord Ravenscroft began, his voice carrying the weight of authority, yet quivering with a hint of uncertainty. "I trust you've all enjoyed the meal thus far, but now, as promised, I must reveal to you something that has been long kept hidden." Poirot's gaze never left the Lord's face, studying the subtle twitch of his eye, the tightness of his jaw. Lord Ravenscroft's words were theatrical, meant to build suspense, but Poirot saw through them. It was as though the man were trying to control the situation, to manipulate the atmosphere. And there was something more, something in the way Lord Ravenscroft's voice faltered that hinted at a deeper fear. He paused, allowing the guests to murmur among themselves, but Poirot saw through the facade. His eyes flicked towards Lady Ravenscroft, who, though present at the table once again, had not spoken since her hasty exit earlier. She sat in her seat, her fingers tightly clutching the edge of the table, her face pale as death. It was as though she were bracing herself for something she knew was coming. "Tonight," Lord Ravenscroft continued, "I present to you a challenge, a puzzle, one that has been handed down through generations of my family. It is not a mere game, mind you, but a riddle, a key to unlocking something profound." He gestured to a large, ornate envelope resting on the table in front of him. Its edges were frayed, and the wax seal was darkened with age, yet it still glistened in the candlelight. Poirot's eyes narrowed. This was no ordinary puzzle. It was something much deeper, and it was no coincidence that this puzzle had found its way into his hands. "The envelope contains a riddle," Ravenscroft explained, his voice trembling slightly. "It has been passed down through generations of Ravenscrofts. It is said that whoever solves the riddle shall uncover the greatest secret of the Ravenscroft family. But be warned, This is not a light matter. There are consequences to uncovering the truth." At these words, the guests stiffened. Mrs. Blanchard, the widow, shifted in her seat, her eyes glinting with a strange intensity. Vincent, the young artist, leaned forward ever so slightly, his breath shallow. Even Dr. Mortimer, the stoic family physician, appeared slightly unsettled. Poirot's eyes flicked between the guests and then to the envelope in front of Lord Ravenscroft. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This puzzle, this riddle, was not merely an intellectual game. It was tied to something far darker, something hidden within the walls of Ravenscroft House itself. And Poirot knew, as sure as he sat there, that it was only a matter of time before the secrets of this family began to unravel. Lord Ravenscroft lifted the envelope, breaking the seal with a soft snap. He withdrew a single sheet of yellowed paper, its edges curling with age, and held it up for all to see. Poirot leaned forward slightly, his mind racing. The riddle was written in flowing script, the ink faded, but still legible. Lord Ravenscroft read aloud. "To the one who dares to unravel this riddle, your reward awaits in the heart of the Ravenscroft estate. But beware, the answer comes with a price. The Ravenscroft curse shall fall upon you, should you fail." There was a long, uneasy pause as the words sank in. The room was so quiet that Poirot could hear the soft rustle of the paper as Lord Ravenscroft slowly lowered it. "The curse," murmured Dr. Mortimer under his breath, as if confirming some long-held belief. Vincent's eyes darted towards the door again, and Mrs. Blanchard's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. Only Poirot remained unmoved, his expression calm, his eyes fixed on the words as though trying to decipher their true meaning. A curse? It was a phrase meant to stir fear, to cloud the judgment of anyone foolish enough to take the riddle seriously. Yet Poirot wasn't fooled. The curse was not a supernatural force. It was a legacy, a weighty burden, one that had been passed down for generations. Lord Ravenscroft smiled thinly, his eyes flickering to each of the guests. "Now, Monsieur Poirot, I believe it is your turn," he said, his tone both a challenge and a plea. "Solve the riddle if you can. But remember, there is no turning back once you begin." Poirot's gaze never wavered from the Lord's face. He could see the nervousness in his eyes, the faint tremor of his hand as he returned the riddle to its envelope. Lord Ravenscroft was not merely presenting a game. He was trying to divert attention away from something far more sinister, something he feared would be uncovered if the riddle were solved. Without a word, Poirot stood, his movements deliberate and measured. He glanced at the envelope, then at the guests around him. The silence in the room was deafening. Everyone was watching him, waiting. The puzzle was in his hands now, but the question that burned in Poirot's mind was not the riddle itself. It was the true nature of the Ravenscroft secret. What was it that they were all so desperate to protect? What had caused Lady Ravenscroft's panic earlier? And why was Lord Ravenscroft so determined to keep this facade intact? Poirot's mind clicked into place as his gaze lingered on the walls of the grand room. The portraits of Ravenscroft ancestors stared down at him, their eyes haunting, almost accusatory. The puzzle was not just about finding an answer. It was about uncovering the truth that had been buried for years. He stepped forward, and with a calm voice, he addressed the room. "The riddle will be solved," he said, "but not by the answer you think." The room fell silent again. The guests exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what Poirot meant. But Poirot wasn't finished. His eyes were now fixed on Lord Ravenscroft. "You, monsieur, are hiding something," Poirot said, his voice unwavering. "And you think that by presenting this riddle, you can deflect suspicion from the true mystery. But the puzzle, my friends, is not the one in the envelope. The puzzle is you." Lord Ravenscroft's smile faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough. In that fleeting instant, Poirot knew the game had changed. The real riddle had nothing to do with the Ravenscroft family's treasure or curse. It had everything to do with the dark secret Lord Ravenscroft had tried so desperately to keep hidden. And Poirot was going to uncover it, piece by piece. As the tension in the room mounted, Poirot's mind danced between possibilities. This was no longer just a matter of solving a riddle. It was about exposing the truth beneath the layers of deception. And Poirot, as always, was ready to follow the clues, wherever they led. Chapter 5. A Murder in the House. The air in the Ravenscroft estate seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment, as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Poirot had long learned to trust the subtle shifts in the atmosphere, the moments when silence, though present, becomes charged with meaning. It was then that he noticed it. The quiet that had settled over the room had become oppressive. The guests' uneasy murmurs had quieted, replaced by a stillness that was not natural, not comforting. It was at that moment that the loud crash echoed through the house, sharp and jarring, its sound reverberating against the walls. The entire dinner party froze. The clink of glasses and the quiet hum of conversation stopped instantly. Poirot's eyes shifted towards the door where the noise had originated. The kitchen, perhaps, or somewhere deeper in the house. There was no mistaking the urgency in the sound. It wasn't a simple mistake, a dropped dish or misplaced tray. It had the feel of something much more significant, something that threatened to unravel the fragile tension holding the dinner together. Lord Ravenscroft's reaction was immediate. He leaped from his seat, his face contorted in a fleeting expression of panic, before quickly replacing it with his usual forced composure. His guests watched him closely, but none dared to speak. I will go and see what has happened," Lord Ravenscroft stammered, though his voice betrayed a hint of fear. The guests remained silent, their faces pale, their eyes avoiding one another, as if afraid to break the spell of suspense that had descended upon them. Poirot, however, remained perfectly still, his sharp gaze flicking towards the door. He had already deduced that the incident was more than just an accident. The strange tension, the sudden crash, something had gone terribly wrong. He could feel the puzzle shifting, and for the first time that evening, the pieces were beginning to fall into place, though he had yet to see the full picture. A few minutes passed before Lord Ravenscroft returned, his face pale, his eyes wide with alarm. The guests turned towards him, their expressions filled with a mix of concern and confusion. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken questions. "Dr. Mortimer," Lord Ravenscroft's voice cracked as he spoke. He is dead." The words struck the room like a hammer blow, and a collective gasp rose from the guests. Mrs. Blanchard's hand shot to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock, while Vincent's expression hardened, his lips tightening into a thin line. Dr. Mortimer, the family physician, the calm, collected man who had sat among them just moments ago, was now dead. Poirot stood slowly, his movements deliberate, as though the gravity of the situation required his full attention. His little gray cells were already processing the information, seeking connections, looking for inconsistencies. Something was wrong, very wrong. Lord Ravenscroft was too composed, too quick to announce the death of his guest, and the manner in which he spoke, there was something forced in it, as though he were trying to act the part of a man in control, but failing. Dead? Poirot's voice was calm, even soothing, though there was a hint of steel in it. What happened to Dr. Mortimer, monsieur? Was it an accident? Lord Ravenscroft's hand trembled as he reached for his glass of wine, his fingers brushing against the rim before finally lifting it to his lips. No, he said softly, his voice almost too quiet. It wasn't an accident. I don't know what happened. I found him in his study, slumped over his desk. There was no sign of a struggle. Poirot's mind began to race. A sudden death, found alone in a study with no signs of struggle. This was no accident. The word murder was hovering at the edges of his thoughts, though he kept it to himself for the moment. He had learned long ago that it was unwise to jump to conclusions before all the facts were in place. He turned to Dr. Mortimer's seat at the table, where the doctor had been only moments ago. Poirot could see the faintest traces of his presence: an untouched glass of wine, a napkin still neatly folded, but it was the absence of the man that troubled him most. Dr. Mortimer had been one of the first to arrive, a man who had seemed perfectly composed at the dinner. Yet now, he was gone, his life snuffed out in a manner that none could yet explain. The guests were in disarray, their nerves frayed, their fear palpable. Mrs. Blanchard rose from her chair, her hands trembling as she made her way to the door, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for some escape. Vincent, too, had grown visibly uneasy, his eyes constantly flicking toward the door, as though he feared something or someone might emerge from the shadows. Poirot, however, remained calm. He could feel the unease in the air, but he knew that fear, though understandable, would only cloud their judgment. He needed to bring order to the chaos, to find the truth hidden beneath the layers of panic and confusion. "I will take a look," Poirot said, his voice steady. "Allow me to see Dr. Mortimer." Lord Ravenscroft nodded, his face pale, his expression one of reluctant agreement. He gestured for Poirot to follow him, and together they made their way through the mansion's labyrinthine corridors, past the grand staircase, and into the study where Dr. Mortimer had been found. The study was dimly lit, a fire flickering faintly in the hearth. Dr. Mortimer's body was slumped over the desk, his face turned toward the scattered papers, his hand still gripping a letter, as though he had been in the middle of reading it when his life was abruptly taken. Poirot's eyes moved over the scene, absorbing every detail. The desk was neat, no signs of struggle or disarray, yet the doctor's body was unnaturally still, and his skin had already taken on the pale, waxen hue of death. Poirot bent down, his sharp eyes scanning the scene with precision. There, just by Dr. Mortimer's hand, was a small glass vial, its contents faintly visible in the dim light. Poirot's heart quickened, though his face remained calm. He reached for the vial, carefully picking it up and holding it to the light. It was empty, and from the faint smell lingering in the air, Poirot knew it for what it was: poison. The mystery had deepened. The puzzle had become more intricate, its threads twisting through every corner of Ravenscroft House. Dr. Mortimer had been murdered, poisoned in a way that suggested premeditation. No accident, no spontaneous act of violence. This was a deliberate killing, planned with precision. But by whom and why? Poirot stood up, his mind already working. He needed to ask questions, to dig deeper into the motives behind this murder. Who stood to gain from Dr. Mortimer's death? What had he known, or what had he uncovered that had made him a target? The clues were beginning to fall into place, but the truth, as always, would be hidden behind layers of deception. As he turned to leave the study, Poirot's eyes caught sight of something else. A letter, half hidden beneath a pile of papers on the desk. It was addressed to Dr. Mortimer, but the handwriting was unfamiliar. With a swift movement, Poirot picked it up and slipped it into his coat pocket. Another piece of the puzzle, another clue that would eventually lead him to the truth. Back in the dining room, the Yadi guests had gathered again, their faces pale and drawn, their nerves frayed to the breaking point. The dinner had long since lost its festive air. They were no longer guests at a social gathering. They were suspects in a murder mystery, trapped together in a house filled with shadows and secrets. Poirot stood in the doorway, his presence commanding silence. "It is clear, mes amis," he said, his voice steady and calm, "that we are now involved in something far more serious than a mere puzzle. A life has been taken, and the answer to this mystery lies within these walls." The guests looked at one another, fear mingling with suspicion in their eyes. But Poirot's gaze remained steady. The web of intrigue had tightened, and now, more than ever, the truth was within reach. The first clue had been discovered, but this was only the beginning. There were more layers to uncover, more questions to ask, and Poirot knew that the answers were closer than anyone realized. The game, as it were, had only just begun. Chapter 6. The Ravenscroft Secret. The night had grown deeper, the fire in the hearth flickering with a gentle crackle, its warmth a soothing contrast to the chill that seemed to permeate Ravenscroft House. But despite the cozy ambiance, a thick tension clung to the walls, heavy as fog. The dinner party, once a bright and merry occasion, had now transformed into something darker, a scene charged with suspicion, fear, and the relentless march of secrets begging to be uncovered. Poirot stood at the grand window of the study, looking out into the night. The grounds of Ravenscroft House were bathed in moonlight, and for a moment, everything seemed serene, as though the murder that had occurred inside those walls was nothing more than a distant dream. But Poirot knew better. He could feel it in his bones. The answer was within reach, hidden somewhere in the shadows of this grand ancient home. Turning back to the room, Poirot's gaze settled on the assembled guests, each one wrapped in a cocoon of unease, their faces pale and drawn. The murder of Dr. Mortimer had shaken them all. It was no longer an isolated event, something they could brush off as an accident or unfortunate coincidence. It had become the heart of a mystery that no one could escape from. Each of them was now trapped, locked within a puzzle that had yet to reveal its final truth. Poirot's mind danced through the recent events, the strange riddle, the crash, the poison, and now Dr. Mortimer's death. But there was something more, something lurking beneath the surface, and Poirot was beginning to sense it more clearly with each passing moment. The truth behind the murder was entwined with something darker, something that had been buried deep within the Ravenscroft family for years. The key to unlocking it Poirot knew, lay in the family's history, their secret past that no one was willing to speak of, yet which seemed to haunt every corner of this house. There was something about the Ravenscrofts, some old wound they had tried to hide, and now, like a festering scar, it was beginning to bleed once more. Lady Ravenscroft had not spoken much since the discovery of the body. Her pale face seemed to grow even paler in the dim light, and her hands were constantly twisting in her lap, as though she were trying to suppress some deep inner turmoil. But it was more than just grief. Poirot could see the terror in her eyes, the fear that she carried with her like a shadow. It wasn't just the loss of Dr. Mortimer that had her so shaken. No, there was something more personal, something that connected her to this death in a way that she wasn't willing to admit. Poirot's eyes drifted to the letter he had taken from Dr. Mortimer's desk, the one addressed to the doctor in a handwriting he had not yet recognized. The mystery of that letter tugged at his mind like a loose thread, begging to be pulled. He could feel its weight in his pocket, the promise of a clue that would lead him further into the labyrinth of Ravenscroft secrets. Monsieur Poirot, Lady Ravenscroft finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the silence like a knife. You must understand, this house, this family, has always been a place of secrets. There are things here that have been buried, things that no one wishes to remember. Poirot turned to face her, his expression calm but his mind alert. I understand, madam, he said gently, but I believe that the time for secrets is over. The truth, no matter how painful, must come to light. Lady Ravenscroft shivered, her gaze dropping to the floor. You don't understand. You cannot understand, she murmured, her voice quivering. There are things here, things we have tried to forget. Poirot stepped closer, his eyes softening with sympathy. Madame, I do not seek to cause you more pain, but the truth cannot remain hidden forever. The death of Dr. Mortimer has shown me that. For a long moment, Lady Ravenscroft did not speak, but when she did, it was in a low, strained voice, as though every word was being pulled from her against her will. There was a curse, she said, her words like a confession, a curse that has haunted our family for generations. And Dr. Mortimer, he knew too much. Poirot's heart quickened, his mind already racing with possibilities. A curse, a family secret tied to death and betrayal. It was exactly what he had suspected. The Ravenscroft family was not simply hiding an old riddle, they were hiding a legacy of darkness. Before Poirot could ask more, there was a soft knock at the door. It was the housekeeper, her face drawn with worry. Monsieur Poirot, she said in a hushed voice, you must come quickly. Something has happened. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his instincts immediately on high alert. What is it, madame? He asked, though he already feared he knew the answer. The housekeeper hesitated before speaking. It's Vincent, the artist. He's gone missing. We've searched everywhere, but there is no sign of him. Poirot turned to the others in the room. The guests were all watching him, their eyes wide with fear and suspicion. The tension was thick, each one of them caught in a web of secrets and lies that they couldn't escape from. Vincent was the young artist, the one who had been so quiet throughout the evening. He had seemed nervous, his eyes constantly darting to the door, his unease growing with every passing moment. And now, he was gone. Very well, Poirot said, his voice calm but resolute. I will see to this. But first, I must ask, did any of you know where Vincent was before he disappeared? Mrs. Blanchard spoke up, her voice shaky.
He was in the study earlier. I saw him, but he seemed to be in a hurry. He left and I don't know where he went after that.
Was anyone else with him? Poirot asked, his eyes scanning each face in turn. No one, she replied, wringing her hands. Poirot nodded, his mind processing the new development. Vincent had been in the study earlier, and now he was gone. Could his disappearance be tied to Dr. Mortimer's death? Was he involved in some way? Or had something else occurred? Something that even the guests of Ravenscroft House were too afraid to admit. Poirot left the room, his steps deliberate as he made his way through the corridors once again. The house felt even colder now, the shadows lengthening as the night wore on. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. He entered the study where Dr. Mortimer had been found, and there, just as he expected, he found the first real clue: the missing letter. The handwriting was elegant, the words careful, but there was something about the letter's contents that caught Poirot's attention. It was written in a hurried hand, almost frantic, as though Dr. Mortimer had been racing against time. Poirot read the letter, his eyes scanning the cryptic words. It spoke of a hidden family secret, something buried deep within the Ravenscroft estate, something tied to the death of a man long forgotten. But the letter also mentioned someone, Vincent. The young artist had been involved in the mystery all along, perhaps more than anyone realized. Poirot stood still, the weight of the letter heavy in his hands. The puzzle was beginning to come together, but with every piece he uncovered, more questions arose. Vincent's disappearance, Dr. Mortimer's death, the mention of a curse. These were not coincidences. They were threads in a tapestry of secrets, lies, and betrayal that had been woven tightly over generations. Lady Ravenscroft's confession had been a key turning point. The curse, the family's hidden past, the death of Dr. Mortimer, it was all connected. And now, with Vincent missing, the mystery was about to take an even darker turn. As Poirot folded the letter carefully and placed it in his pocket, his gaze turned back to the shadowed corridors of Ravenscroft House. The secrets of this family were far more dangerous than he had anticipated, and he was now deeper in the web than ever before. But Poirot was undeterred. The truth was within his grasp, and he would find it, no matter the cost. The Ravenscroft secret, he knew, was about to be uncovered, and when it was, nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 7. The final reveal. The night had become a thick tapestry of shadows and secrets. The Ravenscroft estate, once an elegant symbol of wealth and prestige, now felt like a labyrinth of lies. Every hallway, every room, a hiding place for truths that were long buried, and for the ghosts of past deeds that could no longer be contained. Poirot stood alone in the darkened study, the faint glow of the fireplace casting long shadows across the walls. The letter he had uncovered, the letter from Dr. Mortimer, was still in his pocket, its weight heavy with the knowledge it carried. The mention of Vincent, the young artist who had gone missing, was the final piece of the puzzle, and Poirot could feel it. The mystery was nearing its end. But what awaited him at the heart of this tangled web? The guests had all retired to their rooms, their nerves frayed, but Poirot knew they were waiting for the inevitable. They were all complicit in some way. And in the silence of the house, Poirot could almost hear the pulse of their secrets, each of them carrying a burden too great to bear. Poirot's mind turned over the events of the evening. Dr. Mortimer's sudden death had shocked everyone, but the poison had been the key. Poirot had known it from the moment he saw the vial, a calculated, cold act, and Vincent's disappearance was no coincidence. It all pointed back to the Ravenscroft family's dark history, a history that, for reasons unknown, they had tried so desperately to suppress. But what had Dr. Mortimer discovered? What had Vincent uncovered that made him a target? Poirot knew the answers were hidden beneath the surface of the family's respectable facade. The Ravenscrofts were more than just aristocrats with a taste for luxury. They were protectors of a secret that had been passed down through generations. The curse, Lady Ravenscroft had whispered. But what curse? Poirot did not believe in such superstitions. No, this curse was something far more human. It was a legacy of guilt, of sins committed long ago, sins that could never be forgiven. The soft creak of a door opening broke the silence. Poirot turned, his eyes narrowing as he saw Lady Ravenscroft standing in the doorway. She was dressed in a simple gown, her face pale, the lines of worry etched deep into her features.
"Poirot," she said,
her voice trembling slightly.
"I need to speak with you. There's something you must understand, something I didn't tell you before."
Poirot motioned for her to come in, his gaze steady, but his mind already turning. What had she come to say? Was it the final piece of the puzzle? Or was it another attempt to deflect the inevitable truth? She entered the room slowly, her steps measured, and she stood before him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The tension between them was palpable, but Poirot remained silent, allowing her the space to speak.
"It's about the curse," she began,
her voice low, as though she were afraid of her own words. "It's not just a family legend. It's a warning that if we ever tried to bury the past, the consequences would be severe." Poirot tilted his head slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Madame, I believe we've already established that there is no curse. What there is a family secret, a secret that you and your husband have worked tirelessly to protect. A secret that now has cost Dr. Mortimer his life." She shook her head, her eyes filled with grief and fear. "You don't understand, Monsieur Poirot. Dr. Mortimer knew too much. He was close to uncovering everything about Vincent, about the Ravenscroft legacy. And that's why he had to die. It wasn't just an accident. It was a necessity." Poirot's brow furrowed, and he took a step closer to her. "A necessity? A necessity for what, madame?" Lady Ravenscroft hesitated, then spoke with a finality that sent a shiver down Poirot's spine. "My husband. He's not the man you think he is. Neither of us are. The Ravenscroft family is built on lies, and those lies have been buried for generations. But Dr. Mortimer was getting too close. He knew something about our past that could destroy us all." Poirot's heart quickened, but his voice remained calm. "What is it, madame? What is the secret you're protecting?" Lady Ravenscroft took a deep breath, her eyes searching the room as if she were afraid of being overheard, though they were completely alone.
"It's about Vincent," she whispered. "He's not just an artist. He's the true heir to the Ravenscroft name."
Poirot's mind raced. Vincent? The young, nervous artist? The missing man who had been so quiet throughout the evening? He was the heir? Lady Ravenscroft continued, her voice growing more urgent. The Ravenscroft fortune, the estate, everything. It was all meant to pass to Vincent. He was the son of my late sister, who had been involved with someone in our past, a man we never spoke of, a man who had been disowned by the family. Vincent's birth was a mistake, a sin that was covered up. But now, Dr. Mortimer had discovered the truth. Poirot's thoughts were a blur, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place one by one. The curse, the secrecy, the hidden heir. It all made sense now. The Ravenscroft family had tried to bury their shame, but Dr. Mortimer had uncovered it. And that was why he had to die. The truth was more dangerous than any ghost or curse. Suddenly the door swung open and Lord Ravenscroft entered the room. His face was flushed, his eyes wild with panic. "What is she telling you?" he demanded, his voice harsh. "What lies is she speaking?" Lady Ravenscroft recoiled, her hand rising to her chest. "It's the truth, Richard. It's the truth, and you know it." Lord Ravenscroft's face twisted in anger, but Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm and firm. "Monsieur, I believe the truth has finally caught up with you." He turned to Lady Ravenscroft, his eyes softening with understanding. "You have lived with this secret for too long, madame. But now, the time has come for it to be revealed." Poirot looked at Lord Ravenscroft, his gaze piercing. "You killed Dr. Mortimer, didn't you? He knew about Vincent. He knew that your family was built on a lie, and you couldn't let him expose it." Lord Ravenscroft's face twisted with rage. "You don't understand, Poirot. This is not something I could allow. The Ravenscroft name must remain intact. We cannot be disgraced. Not after everything we've built." Poirot's voice was quiet, yet filled with conviction. "At what cost, monsieur? You have already sacrificed one life to protect your name. How many more will you destroy to keep your secret buried?" For a long moment, there was silence. Lady Ravenscroft stood at the edge of the room, her face pale, her hands trembling. Lord Ravenscroft, meanwhile, looked cornered, as if the walls were closing in on him. The weight of his actions, the lies he had told, the murders he had committed, all of it was finally catching up with him. Poirot's eyes never left him. "It is over, monsieur. The truth will always find its way to the surface, no matter how deeply it is buried. And now, you will face the consequences of your actions." With that, Poirot turned away, his task complete. The final reveal had come. The Ravenscroft secret was no longer a secret. Vincent, the true heir, was the key to everything. The family's curse, their hidden past, and the dark web of lies they had tried to protect. And as Poirot walked away from the Ravenscroft estate, the weight of the mystery finally lifted, leaving the house behind in its final tragic silence. The truth had been uncovered, but at a price too high to measure. For Poirot, however, there was no victory, only the satisfaction of seeing justice done. The world would never be the same for the Ravenscrofts, but for the detective, it was just another case closed. The shadows of the past had been exposed, and the light of truth had, at last, found its way into the darkness. Chapter 8. The Price of Truth. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a soft, silvery glow over the grounds of Ravenscroft House. The vast estate, once a place of grandeur, now seemed quiet and still, as though it had been holding its breath all night. Inside the house, the echoes of the past reverberated through the grand halls, mingling with the whispers of the present. The air was thick with the weight of secrets revealed, and yet, Despite the truth that had come to light, the darkness still clung to the walls, unwilling to let go. Poirot stood at the window of the study, gazing out over the grounds. His sharp eyes reflected the same stillness that surrounded the house, but his mind was not at rest. He had solved the puzzle, unraveled the layers of deception, but there was no satisfaction in it, no triumph, only a sense of melancholy, for the truth had come at a great cost. A life had been lost, and another, Vincent's, had been shattered forever. Lady Ravenscroft had confessed everything: the curse, the hidden heir, the lies. She had spoken of her family's dark past, the shame they had carried for so long, and the lengths they had gone to protect it. But as the truth had come to light, so too had the consequences of their actions. And as always, it was the innocent who paid the price. Vincent, the true heir to the Ravenscroft estate, had been the one to suffer most of all. He had been caught in the web of his family's secrets, a pawn in a game he hadn't even known he was playing. He had been betrayed by those who should have cared for him, and in the end, it was his bloodline that had sealed his fate. The moment Poirot had uncovered the letter from Dr. Mortimer, the missing piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Dr. Mortimer had known about Vincent's true heritage, and that knowledge had led to his death. But what of Vincent? What had he known? What had he uncovered in his search for the truth? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. He turned slowly, his gaze sharp, as the door creaked open. Lady Ravenscroft entered the room, her eyes downcast, her hands folded tightly in front of her. She looked as though she had not slept, her face drawn with exhaustion and grief. "Poirot," she said, her voice low, strained, "I need to speak with you. There's something else. Something you must know." Poirot nodded, gesturing for her to come inside. He studied her carefully as she stepped forward, noting the tightness in her shoulders, the weariness in her movements. There was something more to her words, something unsaid. "I know you've solved the mystery," she continued, her voice trembling. "But there's more to the story, more than what you've uncovered." Poirot said nothing, waiting for her to continue. He could feel the weight of her words, as though they carried a burden she had been reluctant to share. The truth, once revealed, often led to more questions. And in this case, it seemed that the answers would only deepen the mystery. Lady Ravenscroft took a deep breath, as if gathering the strength to speak. Vincent. He wasn't just the heir. He was also the key to everything. To the Ravenscroft legacy. To the curse that has haunted us for generations. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "The curse," he repeated softly, almost to himself. "It was never a supernatural force. It was something you created, something you allowed to fester." Lady Ravenscroft's face hardened. Yes, it wasn't a curse. It was a punishment for something we did long ago, something that we could never undo. Poirot stepped closer, his voice quiet yet firm. "What did you do, madame? What is it that you've been hiding?" Lady Ravenscroft's eyes met his, and for a moment they seemed to look through him, as if she were searching for some kind of absolution. "My sister," she whispered. "She was involved with someone, a man who was unworthy of her, unworthy of the Ravenscroft name. And when she became pregnant with Vincent, we knew that the family could never accept him. He was a reminder of something we wanted to forget." Poirot listened intently, his mind working through the implications of her words. a family secret, a forbidden love, a son born into a world of shame. It was a tragedy in its purest form, and the Ravenscroft family had tried to bury it, to erase the truth. But the past could never be erased. It had come back to haunt them in the form of Vincent, the forgotten heir.
Vincent was always meant to inherit everything,
Lady Ravenscroft continued, her voice barely above a whisper.
but we couldn't let that happen. Not after everything we'd done. So we made sure he never knew. We kept him in the dark, treated him like an outsider, like a nobody.
Poirot's expression softened, but there was no pity in his eyes, only understanding. He knew what it was like to carry the burden of secrets, to live a life weighed down by guilt. But what had happened here was far more than that. The Ravenscrofts had not just hidden a secret, they had shaped their entire lives around it. And now, it was too late for redemption. Lady Ravenscroft's voice cracked as she spoke again. Dr. Mortimer had discovered the truth. He had found out about Vincent's heritage, about his right to the estate. He had come to me, to us, to tell us that he would expose everything. He was going to make it public. And that's why Richard, had to stop him. Poirot's mind was racing. So Dr. Mortimer had been killed, not just because of what he knew, but because of what he intended to do. He had been a threat to the Ravenscroft family's carefully constructed world, and they would stop at nothing to keep that world intact, even if it meant murder. And Vincent? Poirot asked softly, his eyes never leaving Lady Ravenscroft's face. Where is he now? She shook her head, tears beginning to well in her eyes. I don't know. After everything came out, after you discovered the truth, he was gone. He vanished without a trace. Poirot's expression hardened. Vincent is the key to this mystery, madame. He was the heir, and now he is missing. But where has he gone? And why has he disappeared? For a moment, there was silence in the room, the weight of the conversation pressing down on them both. Lady Ravenscroft seemed lost in her thoughts, her eyes distant, as if she were reliving the decisions she had made, the choices that had led them all to this moment. Poirot took a step back, his mind still churning. He had uncovered the family's dark history, but the puzzle was not complete. There were still pieces missing, and Vincent's disappearance was the key to unlocking the final secret. There's one more thing I must ask, Poirot said, his voice steady. Did Vincent know everything? Did he know that he was the true heir? Did he understand the weight of the Ravenscroft legacy? Lady Ravenscroft hesitated, her gaze flickering with uncertainty. I think he suspected it. I think he always knew there was something more, something we weren't telling him, but he never wanted to confront it. He was afraid. Poirot nodded slowly, his mind racing through the implications of her words. Vincent had been afraid of the truth, afraid of his own heritage, but now the truth had come to him in a way he could never have imagined, and it had cost him everything. Poirot turned to the window, his gaze drifting over the estate. The night was still, the house silent once more, but in his mind, the puzzle was almost complete. The Ravenscroft family had built their world on a lie that had now been exposed for all to see. But the question remained, where had Vincent gone? And what had he learned in the process? Lady Ravenscroft's voice broke through his thoughts. You can't save us, Poirot. There's nothing left. We've done too much, said too much. The price of the truth is too high. Poirot turned to her, his expression soft but resolute. Madame, the price of truth is always high.
but it is the only price worth paying."
The silence that followed was not one of comfort, but of inevitability. The truth had come at a steep cost, but now the Ravenscroft family would have to face it. No longer could they hide behind their lies, their secrets. The truth had found its way to the surface, and nothing would ever be the same again. And as Poirot turned to leave the room, he knew that the final piece of the puzzle had been placed. The mystery was solved, but the price of the truth would linger in the halls of Ravenscroft House forever. Chapter 9. The Return to Normalcy. The stillness of the Ravenscroft estate had been broken by truth, by confession, and by the unraveling of years of family secrets. Yet as the days passed, the oppressive tension that had once smothered the house seemed to lift, albeit slowly. The moon still hung high in the night sky, casting its silver light over the quiet grounds. But something had changed within the walls of the Ravenscroft house. Something irrevocable had shifted, and no one, not even the estate itself, would ever be the same. Poirot had left the estate after the final revelations after the conclusion of the investigation, but the memory of the mystery, the family's tragic legacy, stayed with him, swirling in his mind like an unfinished puzzle, its last pieces lying scattered and broken, like shards of glass on a cold floor. Now, weeks later, Poirot sat in his modest office, his fingers lightly tapping the surface of his desk as he gazed out the window. The sun was beginning to set over the city of London, painting the sky with soft hues of amber and gold. The quiet hum of the streets below seemed far removed from the turbulence he had witnessed at Ravenscroft House. Yet his mind was still there, lingering in the shadows of that dark house, where secrets had been kept for too long. The case had left its mark on him. It wasn't just about solving the mystery, uncovering the lies, and unmasking the murderer. No, this was different. It was about the price of truth, the personal cost of revealing things best left buried, the lives that had been shattered, lives that would never find peace. Poirot leaned back in his chair, reflecting on everything that had transpired. The murder of Dr. Mortimer had been the catalyst, the spark that had ignited the long-dormant secrets of the Ravenscroft family. And Vincent, poor Vincent, had been the one caught in the middle. The true heir to the estate, the son of Lady Ravenscroft's sister, a man who had lived in ignorance of his own legacy until it was too late. His fate had been sealed by the family's refusal to accept the truth of their past. But where was Vincent now? That question had lingered in Poirot's mind, unanswered. After his disappearance, no trace of him had been found. The police had searched, the family had waited, but Vincent was gone, fleeing from a past that had caught up with him far too quickly. Had he truly understood the weight of his heritage? Had he realized the terrible price of the Ravenscroft legacy? Poirot did not know, but in his heart, he feared that Vincent's disappearance was not the end of the story. It was merely a new chapter, one that would remain unfinished until the young artist, now heir, decided to confront the truth of his birthright. Or perhaps he never would. As Poirot sat in the quiet of his office, lost in these thoughts, there came a soft knock on the door. It was gentle, respectful, and yet there was something urgent in it that caught Poirot's attention.
"Entree!"
Poirot called out, his voice calm but steady. The door opened, and in walked a man Poirot had not seen in some time. Detective Inspector Gray, a friend and occasional collaborator on cases too complex for the regular authorities. Gray's tall frame seemed even more imposing in the dim light of the office, but there was a weariness in his eyes that spoke of too many long nights, too many unanswered questions. "Poirot," Gray began, his voice low, almost apologetic. "I hate to disturb you, but there's something you need to see. Something related to the Ravenscroft case." Poirot's curiosity piqued immediately, and he gestured for Gray to sit. "Please, Inspector, tell me, what is it?" Gray hesitated for a moment before reaching into his coat and producing a thin envelope sealed with the unmistakable stamp of Ravenscroft House. He handed it to Poirot, who immediately broke the seal with the practiced care of someone accustomed to solving mysteries. Inside the envelope was a single letter, the handwriting elegant but hurried. The words were few, but their meaning was clear. "To Hercule Poirot," the letter began. "I hope this letter finds you well, though I doubt it will bring you peace. The truth of our family's legacy is more than I can bear. I have left Ravenscroft House, and with it, my birthright. I am Vincent Ravenscroft, but I do not wish to claim what I am not ready for. The curse of our family, the curse of our lives, has already taken too much. I will find my own path, far from here. I hope you understand why I must disappear. This is my final act of defiance, my attempt to escape the weight of a name that I can never truly own. I am sorry for the pain my family has caused you, and I hope you will not search for me. The past is something I cannot outrun. Goodbye, Vincent Ravenscroft." Poirot's fingers tightened around the letter as he finished reading, his mind racing to comprehend the depth of Vincent's words. It was a confession of sorts, a final, desperate act of freedom. Vincent had chosen to vanish, to sever the ties that bound him to the Ravenscroft name. In doing so, he had declared his own independence, though at the cost of leaving behind everything he had once known. But there was a part of Poirot's mind that couldn't let go. Vincent had disappeared, yes, but why had he felt the need to leave? Was it truly an escape from the weight of his family's legacy? Or was there more to it than that? Poirot's little gray cells continued to hum, picking apart the words, the motivations, and the silence that lay between them. Gray watched Poirot closely as the detective processed the letter, waiting for him to speak. Poirot, for once, said nothing, his thoughts a swirling mix of sympathy and frustration. Vincent's choice was clear, but the questions it raised were endless. Had Vincent made the right decision? Or was this simply another act of avoidance, another way to run from the truth? "Do you think he'll ever come back?" Gray asked softly, as if reading Poirot's mind. Poirot turned to face him, his eyes thoughtful. "I do not know, mon ami. I believe Vincent has run away from more than just his family's legacy. He has run from the very idea of himself. But no one can outrun the truth forever. Perhaps in time, Vincent will come to understand that the truth is not a burden to bear, but a freedom to be embraced." Days passed, and life began to return to its own rhythm. The Ravenscroft estate was quiet, its rooms echoing with the ghosts of the past. Lady Ravenscroft, though still carrying the weight of her family's sins, seemed to have found a semblance of peace. The estate, now in Vincent's name, was left in limbo, the future uncertain. Poirot returned to his normal life, but the mystery of the Ravenscrofts lingered in his thoughts. He knew that Vincent's disappearance was not the end. There were still pieces to the puzzle that remained hidden, secrets that had yet to come to light. But Poirot also knew that sometimes the answers we seek are not always the ones we are ready to face. For now, the case was closed, but the echoes of Ravenscroft House would stay with Poirot. The truth had been uncovered, but at a price far too high. And as he sat in his office looking out over the city, Poirot realized that some mysteries would never truly find their resolution. The case had been solved, but the price of truth, of revealing what had been hidden, was never truly paid in full. The cost would remain just out of reach, forever haunting the Ravenscrofts, and perhaps even Poirot himself. Chapter 10. The last puzzle. The world outside Poirot's study was quiet, the muted hum of London streets fading into the background as the night drew near. The delicate scent of evening air drifted through the cracked window, and the occasional clink of a distant carriage wheel on cobblestone was the only sound that punctuated the otherwise peaceful atmosphere. Yet within Poirot's mind, the silence was filled with unanswered questions, the weight of a mystery that still tugged at his thoughts, despite its resolution. He had closed the case, the Ravenscroft case, solved the puzzle of lies, family secrets, and murder. Vincent Ravenscroft had disappeared, choosing to run from the truth of his birthright rather than face the dark legacy of his family. The estate, once a symbol of wealth and power, was now left in limbo, its future uncertain. Lady Ravenscroft had come to terms with her own guilt, the curse of the Ravenscroft name seeming to dissipate with the passing days. Yet there was something unsettling about the whole affair, a lingering sense that the truth, though revealed, had not quite settled into place. There was one final question that remained, an unfinished puzzle piece that was now calling out to Poirot in the quiet of his office. Something felt off. Poirot leaned back in his chair, his fingers gently tracing the edges of the letter Vincent had left behind. He had read it over and over, each time catching a slight nuance he had missed before. Vincent's words were filled with sorrow, resignation, and defiance. A young man burdened by a name he had not chosen, a legacy he could not escape. The artist, once so unsure of his place in the world, had found the courage to run away, to erase his identity, his inheritance, and to seek freedom in the shadows. But something was amiss. It wasn't just the choice Vincent had made. It was the tone, the urgency of the message. There was a subtle finality in his words, a sense of despair that Poirot could not shake. He had been careful with his deductions, yet something about Vincent's disappearance felt like an unfinished symphony, one where the last note had not yet been played. Just as Poirot was lost in thought, the soft chime of the clock on the mantelpiece snapped him from his reverie. His gaze shifted to the door as a gentle knock sounded. "Come in," Poirot said, his voice calm yet filled with the quiet anticipation of the unknown. The door creaked open and Inspector Gray entered, his face drawn with an expression that spoke of something urgent, something unresolved. Poirot studied him carefully, noting the slight furrow of his brow, the way his hands were clenched at his sides. It was clear that Gray had something on his mind, something that would either confirm or challenge Poirot's conclusions. "Poirot," Gray said, his voice low but steady, "there's something you need to see, something I think you'll want to hear." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "What is it, mon ami?" Gray stepped forward and placed a small bundle of papers on Poirot's desk, his fingers trembling slightly as he did so. Poirot glanced down at the papers, noting the Ravenscroft seal stamped at the top of each sheet. His heart quickened. This was unexpected. Gray continued, his voice quiet. These were found in one of Vincent's belongings. After his disappearance, we managed to track down a few of his personal items, sketches, letters, some things he had kept hidden. But one of these papers, it caught our attention. Poirot's fingers hovered over the documents. His curiosity piqued. He unfolded the top page and began to read. As he did, his expression grew more serious. The letter, written in Vincent's hand, was a confession, though not the kind of confession one might expect. To those who would seek the truth behind the Ravenscroft name, beware. The curse of our family is not ones that can be easily escaped. I have learned that much in the days since I left, but I do not seek to be part of this twisted legacy. The truth, however, is not what you think. What you have uncovered is only a shadow of the real story. There is more to this family, more to my birthright. I am not the true heir to Ravenscroft. The real heir has been hidden for reasons far more dangerous than you could ever imagine. They will come for what is theirs, and when they do, it will be too late. I have done what I could to stop it. But now, my path is set. The Ravenscroft curse lives on. Poirot's mind was reeling. Vincent had left a second confession, one that had remained hidden all along. The truth he had sought to escape was far darker than anyone had realized. The Ravenscroft legacy, the estate, the curse, it was not just about a name, about money or inheritance. There was something deeper, something more dangerous, lurking beneath the surface. The idea that Vincent wasn't the true heir to the Ravenscroft estate, that there was someone else, someone hidden, stirred Poirot's curiosity. He looked up at Gray, his eyes steely. You're telling me that Vincent was not the true heir? Poirot's voice was calm, but underneath it lay the crackling energy of a mind that was racing with possibilities. Gray nodded slowly. I didn't believe it at first, but there's evidence. Old family records, letters, things we never considered before. Someone else, someone connected to the Ravenscroft family, has been kept hidden, and they're coming for what is theirs. Poirot leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of his lips as he processed the new information. The pieces of the puzzle had shifted again, and the mystery was no longer just about the Ravenscroft family's past. It was about the future and the hidden heir who was now on the verge of reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. The question that gnawed at Poirot was clear. Who was this hidden heir, and what did they want? What lengths would they go to in order to claim their birthright? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted as a sudden realization washed over him. This hidden heir, this shadow in the Ravenscroft family history, had been the catalyst all along. The truth Vincent had run from wasn't just the weight of his family's name, but the fact that he was not meant to carry it. The real heir had been someone else, someone out of sight, but now poised to emerge from the shadows. The mystery of Ravenscroft House was far from over. Vincent's flight had been a desperate attempt to escape the truth, but it was the truth of the true heir's identity that Poirot now needed to uncover. If Vincent had fled, it was because he feared this revelation. The appearance of someone who would shatter everything he had tried to build. The Ravenscroft name had been tainted, but in the end, someone else was going to reclaim it. Poirot stood slowly, his mind sharp and focused. "Inspector," he said, his voice steady, I believe this is not the end of the story, but only the beginning of the next chapter. The true heir to the Ravenscroft estate has yet to be revealed, and when they do emerge, they will change everything. Gray's face was etched with both worry and wonder. You think they'll come for the estate? For Ravenscroft House? Poirot smiled slightly, his expression calm but tinged with the certainty of a man who had seen the shape of things to come. No, Inspector, not the estate, but for something far more dangerous, the Ravenscroft legacy itself. As Poirot stepped away from his desk, his mind racing with possibilities, he knew that this mystery, this final puzzle, was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. It was no longer just about family secrets, betrayal, or murder. It was about a legacy that would now come crashing to the surface with the return of the true heir. The last piece. The puzzle had finally fallen into place, but with it, new questions had emerged, and the stakes were higher than ever. Ravenscroft House was about to be shaken once more, and only time would reveal whether the truth could withstand the storm that was coming.